We don't need outdated old men dragging the team down. Madison Harper said that, her voice icy cold, hand flicking casually as if firing me were nothing more than a formality. I sat still, saying nothing. My name is Henry Brooks, 60 years old. I'd worked at Harper Industrial in Columbus, Ohio for 18 years as operations manager, the person who kept every cog in this company turning, even when no one noticed. I wasn't the kind to talk much in meetings. I didn't need the spotlight or praise. I just worked. Every shift, every process, every person on the floor. I knew them all. I could even tell when a bolt was loose on the hydraulic press just by the slight change in vibration. But none of that mattered to Madison, the 28-year-old who had just returned from 2 years in Miami with an MBA and grand ideas about revolutionizing the manufacturing industry. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I didn't flip a desk. I just nodded once, stood up slowly, and walked out, as if I'd just finished another regular workday. When I returned to my office to pack up, the young employees I had trained from day one, many now with families and careers, looked at me in silence. No one said a word, not even goodbye. But I understood. They were scared. Scared they might be next. I packed my things into an old cardboard box, a commemorative watch for 10 years of service. A faded photo of my wife, Linda, who passed away from cancer 4 years ago, and a handwritten technical notebook I'd made when I first started. This company had been built by Richard Harper, Madison's father, who turned it from a small garage shop into a multi-million-dollar business. He was the one who brought me on when I was 42, after I'd lost my job at a dying auto plant. I don't need degrees, he once said. I need someone who understands how machines work. And I proved I was that person. But Madison wasn't Richard. She didn't ask me a single question, didn't even review my contract. If she had, maybe she would have seen the clause Richard once added, a special clause that required the company to pay 2 years' salary if I were terminated without legal cause. I walked out to the parking lot, placed the box on the passenger seat of my truck, and sat behind the wheel. Through the windshield, I saw the factory where I had spent nearly 2 decades, once a place of pride, now seemingly turning its back on me. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I just smiled slightly. Because Madison Harper had just made a mistake she didn't yet know she'd pay dearly for. That evening I sat alone at the dining table, holding a printed copy of my employment contract, pulled from an old hard drive in the garage. Next to it was Linda's fountain pen, one I only used for signing important papers. I wasn't in a hurry. I read every line, every paragraph, as if revisiting my life written in legal language. Clause 14, Section 3. In the event of termination without just cause as defined in Appendix C, the employee shall be entitled to severance compensation equal to 24 months of current salary. A short paragraph, but it hit like a sledgehammer. Richard Harper was the one who insisted that clause be added. He once told me, "I don't want anyone poaching you from this company, Henry, and I don't want my daughter tearing it apart just because she doesn't understand real value." I set the contract down and called Raymond Cole, a longtime friend and attorney who also helped me arrange Linda's funeral. He picked up after 2 rings. "Henry? Ray, I think. We've got work to do." I heard his chair slide back, and a light exhale, as if he had seen this coming for a long time. "I still have your old files. Send me the contract. I'll take care of the rest." The next morning, while I was sipping coffee by the kitchen window, my phone rang. A familiar name appeared on the screen, Richard Harper. I hesitated a beat, then answered. "Henry." His voice was hoarse and tired. "What the hell happened?" "You'd better ask Madison." "I did." He paused. "She said you were uncooperative, that you undermined the new leadership, that you were being defiant." I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. He knew me better than that. I wasn't defiant. I just didn't bow to something I knew was wrong. "You're going to sue, aren't you?" "I've asked Ray Cole to handle it." A long sigh came through the line. I warned her about that clause in your contract. She thought I was being paranoid. So what are you going to do now? I'm retired. I don't have any power anymore. But Henry, his voice faltered. I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this. I believed him. But an apology couldn't change anything. It couldn't bring back the people who had been pushed out just for being too old. Before hanging up, I asked directly, Did Madison also fire Tom Granger? Yes, and Claire Benton too. I clenched my fist. Two of the most capable people I had ever worked with. One who maintained our core machinery, the other who ensured quality control, erased simply because they dared to speak up. The call ended, but clarity had dawned in me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was a quiet purge of the very people who built the foundation of Harper Industrial. And if Madison thought she could do that without anyone speaking up, she was wrong. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and started calling. First Tom, then Claire. You got fired too? Tom Granger's voice came through the phone, half frustrated, half bitter. No warning, no clear reason. Just one sentence. We're changing direction. Same here, Tom said. After 12 years maintaining the company's entire technical foundation, I was replaced by some kid with Bluetooth earbuds who talks more than he works. Next, I called Claire Benton. She was still clearing out her lab. I had to sign a 14-page handover report, Claire said, her voice flat. Not a single thank you. No one came to see me. I've got just 3 years left until retirement. I listened without interrupting. I knew that feeling. Being dismissed not because you're incompetent, but because your experience makes others feel inadequate. When the calls ended, I looked. Over my old contact list, names that had stood beside me through thousands of hours of overtime, hands that once fixed machinery with me in the Ohio snow and rain. I sent each of them a short message. Check your contract. If there's a protection clause, call Raymond Cole. He's helping me. By noon, I'd received over 10 callbacks. Some were stunned, some were angry. But they all shared one thing in common. They were treated as if they had never existed. I understood clearly. This was no longer personal. This was a campaign to scrub out the past. Anyone who had served under Richard Harper's era was a thorn in Madison's side. She wanted to refresh the company by erasing those who had kept it alive during the hard times. And if she wanted a new Harper, then I would build something, even newer. I dialed Greg Nolan, founder of Nolan Industrial Solutions in East Columbus. He had once tried to recruit me away from Harper to help him develop precision hydraulics, a field Harper ignored in favor of chasing mass output. Greg picked up faster than expected. Henry Brooks. I thought you were still sitting pretty in that golden chair at Harper. I was let go this week. Silence for a beat. Then a short chuckle. You free this afternoon? I'm already on my way. We met at an industrial cafe next to his plant. Greg, a man in his 60s, silver beard, rolled up sleeves, didn't mince words. I still want to open a custom hydraulics division, but I need people who know how to do the work. Not MBAs. I need someone who's held a wrench, someone who understands how oil pressure and compression valves actually function. I'm not coming alone, I said. I can bring the chief engineer, a quality control supervisor, a CNC programmer, all people Harper just threw away. Greg leaned back, eyes thoughtful. Then where do we start? I looked out the window, where the season's first raindrops tapped gently on the asphalt. We start with what Madison doesn't understand. Quality comes from people, and people can't be replaced by an Excel spreadsheet. 3 days after my meeting with Greg Nolan, I was seated in a law office conference room in downtown Columbus. Beside me was Raymond Cole, my old friend, his metal-rimmed glasses perpetually slipping down his nose, his worn leather briefcase, showing signs of decades in litigation. Across from us sat Madison Harper, her blonde hair curled to perfection as always, but this time unable to mask the tension beneath her makeup. Next to her was a young lawyer who looked fresh out of law school, jacket creased at the shoulders, eyes nervously darting across the contract I had signed nearly 2 decades ago. "Shifting business direction is sufficient grounds for termination," Madison began, voice stiff. Raymond didn't argue right away. He simply slid a copy of the contract across the table, his finger landing precisely on the yellow highlighted section. Clause 14, Section 3. Termination without a documented reason shall be considered unjust and is subject to compensation equal to 24 months' salary. The young lawyer, Justin, according to his nameplate, frowned. One could argue Mr. Brooks responded negatively to new leadership, creating a hostile work environment. Raymond didn't flinch. And what documentation supports that? Warnings? Reports? Performance reviews? Justin shuffled through a folder so thin it was practically empty. "We're prepared to offer 6 months' salary," Madison interjected, trying to sound firm. "More than necessary." Raymond calmly closed his folder. "Then we'll proceed to litigation. With this case, we won't just secure the $320,000 in severance. We'll also pursue an age discrimination lawsuit, considering the mass termination of employees over 50. Justin looked nervously at Madison. She pushed his hand aside. "We won't be blackmailed," she snapped, then turned to me. "You'll never find work at your age. No company wants someone with 1 foot in retirement." I said nothing. I simply looked her in the eyes and tilted my head slightly. There are things more important than having a job. Like keeping your word. Like treating the people who built what you're now destroying with fairness. The conference room door swung open. Richard Harper stepped in, cane in hand, looking thinner than the last time I saw him, but his eyes still sharp. "Madison." He spoke only her name. That was all it took. "We're in a legal meeting, Dad." "No, you were. It's over. Justin, draft a full severance agreement per the contract." Madison flushed red, her lips trembling. "You can't." "I can. And I should have done this 6 months ago." He turned to me. "I'm sorry, Henry. I should have listened when there was still time to fix things." I nodded. No resentment, no words needed. As we stood, Madison stepped in front of me. "Don't think this is over. I'll audit every partner, every supplier. Anyone who works with you will never do business with Harper again." I looked at her, not with anger, not with contempt. Just a simple nod. "You're right about one thing. This isn't over." The $320,000 severance was deposited into my account a week later, the largest sum I had ever seen in my life. I didn't rush to spend a cent. I just stared at the numbers glowing on my phone screen, then set it down. Not because I didn't need the money, but because money wasn't what I'd truly lost when I left Harper. What I lost was faith in how people treat the time and effort of others. That afternoon, I met Tom Granger at a small diner off the highway. The kind of place with a few truckers sipping coffee and an elderly couple having an early dinner. Tom arrived 5 minutes late, wearing the same worn jacket I remembered from last winter. "Raymond helped me negotiate a year's salary," Tom said, stirring his coffee without drinking. "Not as much as you, but better than walking away empty-handed." "Harper want you to sign an NDA?" "Of course. No talking about technical processes, clients, internal docs." 5 years of silence. I slid a business card toward him. "Greg. Nolan, True Core Systems. He's looking for someone who knows custom hydraulics inside and out." Tom glanced at the card, his eyes scanning the words before landing on one line. "You trying to rope me into more legal mess?" "No. As long as you're only advising on industry standards and steer clear of Harper's intellectual property, no one has grounds to sue." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he rested his hand on the card like it was the last page left from a chapter he never got to finish. "Henry, this isn't like you. You were never the one to stir things up." I nodded, offering no resistance. "Maybe I've changed. Or maybe I'm just trying to rebuild what others were too quick to throw away." I didn't tell Tom everything about the plan. But I did tell him about the old warehouse in East Columbus Greg had just leased, where we were installing the first production line. I told him about the niche component contracts Harper had ignored for years. And I told him about the people I once called teammates, people who still hadn't found their footing again. "You want me to be your chief engineer?" Tom asked. "I want you to help me rebuild, from the ground up. Every bolt, every detail. Just like we used to when Harper was still Harper." Tom smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then where do we start?" "We start by not repeating old mistakes, sacrificing people in the name of numbers." The next day, I met with Claire Benton over a simple lunch in the break room of the lab where she was doing freelance work. She looked tired. She was meticulous, never once letting a flawed component make it past the line. But Madison had slashed her lab budget without mercy. 3 more years and I retired, Claire said. "But I don't want to leave this industry with a scar like that. I don't need it for life. I just need 3 years of experience at the right time." Claire studied me, eyes narrowed. "What are you building, Henry? A company that values its foundation more than its facade." I didn't hide the fact that Jason Wright, the CNC programmer, had already reached out. He'd been cut by Madison too. 30% of his budget slashed, workload doubled. I told him to wait 3 weeks. Now the only role left was a systems design lead, and I knew I'd find one. We named the company True Core Systems. Tom came up with the name. "If you want to build something that lasts," he said, "you start with the core, not the surface." 3 weeks later, in a dusty old warehouse being transformed into a manufacturing plant, I stood on a bare concrete floor, listening to the sounds of drills, measuring tapes, and human hands rebuilding something. Honest. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in many months, I felt like I was finally walking in the right direction. On the first morning at True Core Systems' new workshop, I stepped in with the scent of fresh paint still lingering and the sound of newly installed machines being tested. The workbenches hadn't yet been labeled. The assembly line diagrams were still taped to the walls with masking tape. But one thing was clear. Everyone there knew exactly why they were present. Greg Nolan laid the factory blueprint on an old wooden table he jokingly called the war table. His eyes scanned every detail like he was rereading a familiar piece of music. "The auxiliary machine shops are confirmed. The first 5 units can be delivered within 30 days, he said, pointing to the notes beside a supplier agreement. "The new programmer starts Monday," I nodded. That programmer was Jason Wright, who had once overseen the entire CNC process at Harper. After his budget was slashed and he was left stranded in the very lab he optimized, he'd sent me a simple 3-word message. "Ready now." "How many people so far?" Greg asked, pouring himself more coffee. 7, I replied. All of them used to be top performers at Harper. Greg gave a low whistle. Harper's bleeding talent. Didn't answer. I didn't need to. That morning's news bulletin had spoken for me. Harper Industrial was facing complaints from 3 major clients due to delays in delivery and recurring technical failures. One of them was Midwest Manufacturing, a former strategic partner, now looking for alternatives. My phone buzzed. A message from Claire Benton, still officially listed as a consultant at Harper due to her contract not yet expiring. But everyone knew she was the last thread holding their production lines together. She'd sent a photo of an internal report, 3 stalled production lines, a 40% spike in QA failures, and a warning from a supervisor. If things don't improve, we're guaranteed to lose at least 2 more contracts. I handed the screen to Greg. He adjusted his glasses, read carefully, then put the phone down in silence for a few seconds. "We'll approach Midwest," I said. "Let them know we'll be operational in 60 days. They need options, and we need a market." Greg made a quick note, then looked at me, eyes narrowed. "You know what makes me believe in this project, Henry?" What's that? Not the money, not the scale. It's how you work with people. You don't make promises. You build. I didn't know what to say. I just looked down at the shop floor, where Tom Granger was hand-sketching a new hydraulic diagram before converting it to CAD, where Jason was teaching two young programmers the principles of 3D simulation, where experience and innovation weren't in conflict, but harmonized like two halves of a precise blueprint. As I walked up to the balcony to observe, my phone rang again. This time, the caller was Richard Harper. I didn't answer right away. I knew, when he called at this hour, it wasn't for pleasantries. I looked at Greg, motioned that I'd step outside to take the call, and swiped to answer. Henry here. His voice was older now, but not weak. I know what you're doing, and I think it's time we had a serious conversation. I stood still. A cool breeze slipped through the newly installed roll-up door. About what? About how to save. What's left of Harper? Tonight, 7 o'clock, at my house. Bring Tom if you can. The board wants to hear a proposal. Richard Harper didn't waste words. He knew he didn't have much time left, neither in health nor in authority over the company he once built. Ended the call without saying I'd come, but I didn't refuse either. Inside, part of me still wanted to walk away and let Harper sink on its own. But another part, the one that had once stood beside Richard in the factory during brutal snowstorms, still remained, and that part couldn't abandon it. That evening, I went. Tom came with me. The red brick house on the northern outskirts of Columbus hadn't changed, but under the dim yellow lights, it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a post-war battlefield. Inside the living room, 5 people sat around the table. Richard, 2 board members, and a corporate lawyer. Their faces needed no explanation. They had seen enough. Seen the company spiral downward. Seen the exodus of personnel. Seen clients demand damages. Richard sat slightly off-center, cane resting beside him. He gestured for me to begin. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a preliminary merger plan. A proposal for TrueCore Systems to absorb Harper's entire hydraulics division, retain its core personnel, and operate independently under a new structure. We're not here to buy Harper cheap, I said, voice steady and low. We're here to preserve what's still alive. No one objected. Richard gave a slight nod. Are you sure you can run it? He asked. I looked at Tom, then back at Richard, and nodded. No one understands this system like we do, and this time, we won't let it be destroyed by an MBA and a few leadership videos from YouTube. 6 months after I was fired, I stood at the back of the main conference room at Harper Industrial. The company-wide quarterly meeting had just begun. Madison Harper sat at the head of the table, surrounded by new executives under the age of Isam Sa, all sharply dressed, yet visibly uneasy. Madison was presenting the past quarter's results. Revenue down 37%, 3 major contracts canceled, product quality in decline. Her tone remained confident, blaming market conditions and outdated legacy mindsets. She hadn't noticed me until her eyes scanned the last row. What is he doing here? Madison snapped, shooting to her feet. Every head turned toward me. I didn't respond. But Richard Harper, seated near the board of directors, gave a subtle signal to the board chair. Madison, he said calmly. The board has met and reached a decision regarding the company's leadership. She went pale. You're joking, right? I'm the largest shareholder. Richard rose slowly. You hold 20%. I hold 51%. And I voted in favor of the merger. I stepped forward and placed a folder on the table in front of Madison. Harper Industrial will merge into TrueCore Systems. The hydraulics division will be maintained. The rest will be restructured under new leadership. The door opened. Tom Granger walked in, slow but steady. Madison trembled as she flipped through the documents. This is betrayal. No, I said. This is business, and the consequence of failing to value the people who kept your company alive. She didn't reply. She just stood there, frozen in the very room where she once held all the power. 1 year after the merger, I stood on the balcony of TrueCore, Harper Division, looking down at the expanded production floor, where machines moved like a perfect mechanical symphony. The old crew, Tom, Jason, and even Claire, who had now officially joined as a technical advisor, worked side by side with a new generation of engineers, seamlessly in sync. Beside me, Richard Harper leaned on his cane, his frame thinner than before, but his eyes sharp and clear. Latest quarterly report, he said, handing me a thick folder. Revenues up. Highest profit margins in 5 years. 3 new patents filed. I flipped through a few pages and nodded. Numbers didn't lie. But what satisfied me most was what I saw on the floor below. The people once cast aside were now leading the charge. Madison called yesterday, Richard said after a long silence. From Miami. Wants to start a consulting firm. Asked if I'd invest. I didn't say anything, but he smiled faintly. I told her to come back here. Start from scratch. Be a technician. Work with the assembly team. She hung up. But this morning, she called again. Asked if the offer still stood. I wasn't surprised. Mistakes can destroy someone, or change them. Down below, Jason was guiding 2 new techs at the CNC station. In the far corner, Tom was revising a draft in pencil before sending it to CAD. Claire inspected the output components, still gloved, her gaze as meticulous as ever. I turned to Richard. You once said you added that severance clause because you believed I'd never walk away. And I was right, he said. You didn't walk away. You just came back to rebuild what never should have been broken. I didn't reply, just looked down at the factory, where experience and innovation no longer clashed, but worked together. Some lessons come at a steep cost, but those lessons are always worth the price.